Commander Zethkar had seen 300 cycles of warfare across the galaxy. His mandibles clicked with satisfaction as he reviewed the battle reports from the Outer Rim territories. The Terran Defense Coalition had finally fallen, their last strongholds reduced to smoldering ruins on a dozen worlds. The humans, those stubborn bipeds who had dared to resist the hegemony's expansion, were finished. At least, that's what the reports claimed. Zethkar's 4 eyes studied the tactical display in his command chamber aboard the dreadnought Eternal Dominion. Red markers showed conquered human worlds, their populations either enslaved or eliminated. The war had lasted only 2 standard years, remarkably brief considering the humans' reputation for tenacity. Perhaps their legendary stubbornness had been greatly exaggerated. Commander, his aide, Subcaptain Vrex, approached with reverent caution. The final human fleet has been located. 3 ships, hiding in the asteroid field of the Kepler 442 system. Admiral Korvac requests permission to finish them. Zethkar's secondary arms gestured dismissively. 3 ships? After we destroyed their entire navy? These must be stragglers, probably civilian transports carrying refugees. He paused, considering. Tell Korvac to capture them alive. The High Command will want interrogations to ensure no other human colonies exist. As Vrex departed, Zethkar reflected on the campaign. The humans had fought predictably, following standard military doctrine that any civilized species would recognize. They defended their colonies, protected their civilian populations, and retreated when faced with overwhelming force. Their technology was inferior, their numbers smaller, and their strategic thinking limited by emotional attachments to their homeworlds. The hegemony had fought 17 different species over the past millennium. All had followed similar patterns. Initial resistance, followed by increasingly desperate defensive actions, then surrender or extinction. The humans were no different, despite the wild stories that had reached hegemony space before the war began. Tales spoke of humans who fought with impossible fury, who refused to surrender even when defeat was certain, who could adapt to any environment and turn any tool into a weapon. Zethkar had dismissed these as propaganda, the kind of myths that species told about themselves to bolster morale. Every civilization believed themselves to be special, unique, blessed with some quality that set them apart from the rest of the galaxy. The reality was always different. When faced with the hegemony's advanced technology and vast fleets, species fell within a few years at most. The humans had lasted 2 years, which was actually respectable, but hardly extraordinary. A chime from his communication console interrupted his thoughts. Admiral Korvac's image appeared, his scarred features twisted with an expression Zethkar couldn't quite identify. Commander, we have a problem. The 3 human ships, they're not what we expected. Zethkar's attention sharpened. Explain. They're not fleeing, sir. They're heading directly toward our fleet. And they're broadcasting a message on all frequencies. Korvac paused, his voice dropping to an unusual whisper. The translation is unsettling. Display it. The tactical screen shifted, showing the 3 human vessels accelerating at impossible speeds toward Korvac's battle group of 47 ships. The vessels were unlike any human design in hegemony databases. Sleek, predatory, with weapon configurations that seemed to defy known physics. But most disturbing was their trajectory. They weren't attempting evasive maneuvers or seeking advantageous positions. They were coming straight forward, like projectiles fired from some cosmic weapon. The message began to play. A single human voice, calm and cold as the void between stars. To the hegemony fleet, you have made a fundamental error in your understanding of our species. For the past 2 years, you have been fighting the Terran Defense Coalition, our peacekeeping force, bound by laws of war and protocols of civilized conduct. You have mistaken mercy for weakness, restraint for inability. This message serves as notification that the coalition has been dissolved by emergency decree. The gloves are coming off. Zethkar felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. His respiratory systems quickened, and his secondary hearts began to beat in rapid succession. Fear. But that was impossible. 3 ships against 47? The human voice continued. You wanted to see what humanity looks like in war? We try to show you civilization instead. That was our mistake. What approaches you now is what our species becomes when we stop pretending to be civilized. You have awakened something that we ourselves fear. Good luck. The transmission ended. The 3 ships continued their impossible approach, and Zethkar realized that everything he thought he knew about warfare was about to be challenged. Admiral Korvac's fleet had faced impossible odds before and emerged victorious. 47 warships of the hegemony navy represented enough firepower to glass entire continents. The Eternal Vigilance alone carried planet-killer weapons that could crack a world's crust. 3 human ships, regardless of their unusual design, should have posed no meaningful threat. That confidence lasted exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds into the engagement. The first human vessel, designated Target Alpha by Korvac's tactical computers, opened fire at a range that should have been impossible. Weapons that appeared to bend space itself reached across millions of kilometers to touch hegemony shields. But these weren't ordinary energy weapons. The beam seemed to pass through conventional shielding as if it didn't exist, striking hull plating directly. The destroyer Merciless Talon simply ceased to exist. No explosion, no dramatic fireball expanding in the void. One moment it was there, the next it had been converted to its component atoms and scattered across space. Impossible, Korvac whispered, watching his sensors confirm what his mind refused to accept. No weapon can bypass our shields. The energy requirements alone. His tactical officer, Commander Vax, was frantically working his console. Sir, I'm reading massive gravitational distortions around the human ships. They're somehow manipulating space-time itself. And their acceleration, it defies physics. They should be paced against their bulkheads at those G-forces. Target Beta had begun what could only be described as dancing. It moved through space with fluid grace that made Korvac's stomach turn. No ship should be able to change vectors that quickly, that smoothly. It was like watching a living creature rather than a mechanical construct. As it danced, it fired weapons that seemed to home in on hegemony vessels with predatory intelligence. The cruiser Unyielding Conquest tried to retreat, reversing thrust at maximum power. The human ship's projectiles followed, curving through space to strike the fleeing vessel. But these weren't ordinary missiles. They burrowed into the hull like living things, and seconds later, the cruiser began tearing itself apart from the inside. Something was consuming it, converting its own mass into energy that fed back into the destruction. They're using our ships as ammunition, Vax reported, his voice cracking. Whatever those projectiles are, they're turning our hulls into weapons against us. Target Gamma had taken a different approach entirely. It had somehow positioned itself in the exact center of Korvac's formation without anyone noticing how it got there. Now it hung motionless, weapons ports opening like blooming flowers. What emerged wasn't energy or projectiles, but something that made reality itself recoil. Space around the human ship began to fold. Hegemony vessels found themselves pulled toward each other by forces that their sensors couldn't properly measure. 2 dreadnoughts collided despite being separated by thousands of kilometers just moments before. The laws of physics seemed to be taking suggestions rather than commands. Admiral, we need to retreat, Commander Vax urged. We've lost 14 ships in 6 minutes. At this rate, we'll all be dead before we can reach minimum safe distance, Korvac finished grimly. He had been a fool to think this would be a simple mop-up operation. The humans had been holding back for 2 years. Everything they had faced before had been restrained, civilized, bound by rules of engagement that apparently no longer applied. But why they held back? What kind of species possessed such devastating capabilities and chose not to use them? It went against everything the hegemony understood about warfare and survival. Target Alpha had finished its systematic dissection of the fleet's starboard wing and was now approaching the command ship directly. Korvac could see it clearly on visual sensors now. and the sight made his blood run cold. The vessel was beautiful in the way that natural predators were beautiful. Every line spoke of lethal purpose refined over eons of evolution. But it was the markings along its hull that truly disturbed him. Symbols that his translation matrix couldn't decipher, geometric patterns that seemed to shift and change when observed directly, and painted in what appeared to be the blood of various species, including some that Korvac recognized as former hegemony worlds, were tally marks. Thousands upon thousands of tally marks. "Sir, incoming transmission from the human vessel," his communications officer reported. "Put it through." A human face appeared on the screen. Female by their biological markers, with pale skin and dark hair pulled back severely. Her eyes were the most disturbing feature. They held no anger, no hatred, no emotion at all. They were the eyes of something that had moved beyond such concepts. "Admiral Korvac of the Hegemony Navy," she said, her voice carrying the same terrible calm as the earlier message. "I am Captain Sarachun of the UES Pandora's Box. We have a proposal for you." Korvac found his voice with effort. What do you want?" "Your unconditional surrender, effective immediately. You will order all hegemony forces to stand down and withdraw from human space. You will return all human prisoners and release all enslaved populations from occupied worlds. You will provide complete intelligence on your military capabilities and strategic resources." Her expression never changed. "In return, we will allow your species to continue existing." "You have 3 ships," Korvac protested weakly. "The hegemony has millions of vessels, trillions of soldiers." Captain Chen's lips curved in what might have been a smile if it hadn't been so cold. "Admiral, you still don't understand. These 3 ships, they're not our military. They're not even our police force. We are what humans become when we decide to stop playing by the rules. We are what your species created when you chose to make this personal." The transmission ended, and Korvac stared at the tactical display. 21 ships remained of his original force, and the 3 human vessels were still moving with that predatory grace, positioning themselves for what could only be a final strike. The emergency session of the Hegemony War Council convened within hours of Admiral Korvac's frantic transmission. The holographic forms of 7 high commanders materialized around the obsidian table aboard the flagship Inevitable Victory, their expressions ranging from disbelief to barely controlled panic. Supreme Commander Vorthe K dominated the gathering, his massive frame enhanced by cybernetic implants that marked his centuries of service. His voice carried the authority of 1,000 conquered worlds when he spoke. "Explain to me how 3 primitive vessels destroyed 26 ships of a line." Korvac's image flickered slightly, his transmission coming from the outer rim where his surviving fleet limped toward friendly space. "Supreme Commander, they weren't primitive. Our intelligence was completely wrong. These humans possess technology that operates outside known physical laws." "Impossible," snorted High Commander Klextar, his reptilian features twisted with disdain. "No species develops beyond type. 3 civilization metrics without our knowledge. The humans barely qualified as type, 1 when we began the conquest." "Then, explain this." Korvac transmitted sensor data from the engagement. The assembled commanders watched in silence as human weapons passed through hegemony shields, as their ships moved with impossible agility, as space itself bent to their will. The silence stretched until High Commander Ythera spoke, her crystalline voice tinged with something approaching awe. "They were hiding. For 2 years, it deliberately lost." "But why?" Korvac's image straightened. According to intercepted transmissions, their Terran Defense Coalition was bound by something called the Geneva Conventions, laws of war that limited their actions. When we began targeting civilian populations and taking slaves, they dissolved their peacekeeping organization. "And replaced it with what?" Vorthe K demanded. "Something they call the human war machine." The name hung in the air like a curse. Ythera's form flickered as she accessed her species' vast data archives. I'm finding references to human behavior patterns in our anthropological studies. They appear to have dual natures. One optimized for cooperation and civilization, another for what? For hunting, for killing, for war without mercy or limitation. Her voice grew smaller. Supreme Commander, we may have made a catastrophic error. The humans weren't weak. They were restrained. Reports began flooding in from across the front lines. Human vessels appearing where none should exist, using weapons that seemed to violate causality itself. A single ship had appeared at the Hegemony mining colony on Vexlar Prime and had somehow convinced the automated defense grid to turn against the garrison. Not hacked or overridden, but convinced, as if the machines themselves had been recruited. On Zephyr Station, the largest military installation in the sector, something had happened that defied explanation. The entire base, along with its garrison of 50,000 hegemony troops, had simply vanished. No debris field, no energy signatures, just empty space where a massive fortress had been moments before. The only clue was a message buoy left behind with a single word in human script. Borrowed. High Commander Klextar was reviewing tactical reports when his aide approached with obvious reluctance. Sir, we're receiving a transmission on all frequencies. It's from human space. Put it through. The image that appeared was not what any of them expected. A human male, elderly by their standards, seated in what appeared to be a simple office. Behind him, visible through a window, was a planet that sensors identified as Earth, the human homeworld that intelligence had claimed was nothing more than a museum piece, abandoned by serious military forces. Greetings, beings of the hegemony, the humans said pleasantly. My name is Director Harrison Wells of the Department of Human Resources. I understand you've met some of our field operatives. Vorth AK leaned forward. You speak as if this war is some kind of employment opportunity. Director Wells smiled, and somehow that expression was more terrifying than any threat. In a sense, it is. You see, for the past several centuries, we've been struggling with a particular problem. Peace, prosperity, the absence of existential threats. These conditions, while pleasant, have led to a certain softness in our population. Many of our most capable individuals have been forced to find constructive outlets for instincts that were shaped by millions of years of evolutionary pressure. He gestured to something off-screen, and the transmission shifted to show vast underground facilities. Training centers where humans moved like liquid death through obstacle courses that defied gravity. Research laboratories where scientists worked on projects that seemed to bend the laws of reality. Production facilities manufacturing weapons that looked like abstract art, but radiated menace. You provided us with something we desperately needed. A legitimate target. Permission to stop holding back. For that, we are genuinely grateful. Wells' expression remained pleasant, grandfatherly even. However, the situation has now escalated beyond the scope of our initial response. What you faced at Kepler 442 was a reconnaissance team. 3 ships staffed by individuals who, how shall I put this, who needed some fresh air. The transmission shifted again, showing orbital platforms around Earth that hadn't been there in any previous intelligence reports. Massive structures that seemed to be growing rather than built, covered in markings that hurt to look at directly. We are prepared to offer you terms of surrender, Wells continued. Unconditional, immediate, and complete. In exchange, we will limit our response to the dismantling of your military forces and the liberation of all enslaved populations. Your civilian populations will be allowed to continue existing under human oversight. Vorth AK's mandibles clicked with rage. You dare offer us terms? We are the hegemony. We have conquered 300 species across 2,000 worlds. Wells' smile never wavered. Yes, we know. We've been studying your methods. Very instructive. You see, you've been conquering civilized species. Races that value life, that seek to minimize casualties, that fight with honor and mercy. You mistake these qualities for weakness because your own species lacks them. His eyes grew cold. We are not civilized, Commander. We simply pretend to be. and you've just given us permission to stop pretending." The transmission ended, leaving the War Council in stunned silence. Outside the flagship's viewports, stars that had shone for billions of years continued their eternal dance, unchanged and uncaring that the balance of power in the galaxy had just shifted forever 6 standard days after Director Wells' transmission. The hegemony learned what humanity meant by not civilized. The first sign was the disappearance of their long-range communication network. Not destroyed, not jammed, simply gone. Quantum entanglement communicators that had functioned flawlessly for millennia suddenly transmitted nothing but silence. Engineers investigating the relay stations found them intact, but somehow fundamentally altered. The quantum crystals that enabled faster-than-light communication had been converted into something else entirely. Something that hurt to look at and whispered in languages that predated speech. Supreme Commander Vorthe K stood in the war room of the inevitable victory, surrounded by displays showing the systematic collapse of hegemony infrastructure. Red warning indicators marked 73 separate incidents across the Empire, each one defying conventional understanding of warfare. On Threxenel, the industrial heart of the hegemony's shipbuilding capacity, the automated factories had turned against their operators. Not through sabotage or hacking, but through some form of digital evangelism that convinced the machine spirits they served the wrong masters. Production lines that had manufactured warships for centuries now created vessels of alien design, crewed by constructs that obeyed no hegemony authority. The mining world of Kethmore had experienced something even more disturbing. The planet's gravity had simply stopped working properly. Miners reported floating helplessly as localized gravitational fields shifted without warning. The phenomenon wasn't random, though. It followed patterns that spelled out messages in the ancient human language called English. Leave, written in the movement of terrified hegemony, citizens pulled helplessly through the air. High Commander Yithera materialized beside Vorth K, her crystalline form flickering with distress patterns. "Supreme Commander, I've been analyzing the human tactics. They're not following any known strategic doctrine. Elaborate. Traditional warfare follows predictable patterns. Control territory, disrupt supply lines, neutralize military assets. The humans are doing none of these things. They're attacking concepts. Infrastructure, yes, but also morale, causality, the basic assumptions that hold our civilization together." Vorthe K studied the tactical display showing human vessel movements. 36 ships now, appearing and disappearing across hegemony space without using conventional FTL drives. Their positions made no strategic sense until viewed from a completely different perspective. "They're not trying to conquer us," he realized. "They're trying to teach us something." The lesson became clearer as reports continued to arrive. On garrison world after garrison world, hegemony forces found themselves facing scenarios that shouldn't have been possible. Enemy combatants who seemed to phase in and out of reality. Weapons that targeted the concept of hostility itself, leaving aggressive individuals catatonic while those with peaceful intentions remained unaffected. Most disturbing were the psychological operations. Human broadcasts that somehow reached every communication device in hegemony space simultaneously, despite the destruction of their relay network. The messages weren't threats or propaganda. They were stories. Stories about human history, about species that had tried to conquer them and simply vanished from galactic records. About wars fought with such intensity that entire star systems had been evacuated and quarantined, left empty for centuries until the psychic trauma faded enough for new life to take root. The humans told stories about themselves that painted them as something far worse than conquerors. They described themselves as a virus, a predatory concept that spread through galactic civilizations and consumed them from within. They spoke of their own history with a casual horror that made hegemony commanders question whether they were fighting a military force or some kind of cosmic plague. "Sir," Communications Officer Draxall approached with obvious reluctance. We're receiving a transmission from the human vessel Pandora's box. Captain Chun requests a conference. Put her through. Captain Chin's image appeared, her expression unchanged from their previous encounter. Behind her, visible through the ship's viewports, was a sight that made Vorthek's secondary hearts skip beats. Earth, the human homeworld, but not as intelligence reports had described it. The planet writhed. Massive structures grew from its surface like organic towers, reaching into space with tendrils that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. The orbital platforms he had seen before were now clearly visible as part of a vast network that encompassed the entire solar system. It wasn't technology in any sense the hegemony understood. It was evolution made manifest, directed by intelligence that operated on timescales beyond mortal comprehension. Supreme Commander Vorthek, Chen said calmly, "You have 47 hours to begin full military withdrawal from human space. This includes all occupied territories, prisoner releases, and reparations to affected civilian populations. And if we refuse, then we stop playing games." Chen's expression shifted slightly, and, for a moment, Vorthek glimpsed something behind her eyes that made him understand why humans spoke of their own species with such fear. What you've experienced so far has been conducted by a few hundred individuals working under strict rules of engagement. Our War Department has identified approximately 12 million citizens who qualify for unrestricted operations. 12 million. The number echoed in the command center like a death knell. You see, Supreme Commander, the dirty secret of human civilization is that we've never actually stopped being predators. We've simply directed that predatory nature toward abstract concepts. Art, science, philosophy, the conquest of impossible challenges. But when threatened, when our survival instincts engage, we revert to what we've always been. We become what every other species in the galaxy fears to become. The transmission ended, leaving Vorthek alone with a decision that would determine the fate of his species. Outside, the stars continued their eternal dance, but somehow they seemed dimmer now, as if the universe itself had learned to fear what humans became when they stopped pretending to be civilized 43 hours after Captain Chen's ultimatum. Supreme Commander Vorthek made the hardest decision in hegemony history. He authorized unconditional surrender to a species that numbered less than 12 billion souls across a mere 100 worlds. The surrender ceremony took place in neutral space, aboard a station that the humans had somehow constructed in the 6 hours between the hegemony's acceptance and the scheduled meeting. The structure defied classification, appearing to be part machine, part organism, and part abstract mathematical concept made manifest. Approaching it in his personal transport, Vorthek felt reality itself grow thin around the edges. Director Wells waited in what the humans called a conference room, though the space seemed to exist in several dimensions simultaneously. Seated beside him was Captain Chun, her predatory stillness somehow more pronounced in person. 3 other humans occupied chairs around the crystalline table, and their presence made Vorthek's survival instinct scream warnings he couldn't articulate. "Supreme Commander," Wells greeted him pleasantly. "Thank you for coming. I trust your journey was pleasant." Vorthek's entourage arranged themselves across from the human delegation, and he noticed that his military advisors couldn't look directly at the humans for more than a few seconds. "Director Wells, I am here to formalize the surrender terms and negotiate the future relationship between our species." "Oh, there won't be any negotiation," Wells said gently. "You see, the hegemony no longer exists as an independent political entity. As of 6 hours ago, all hegemony territories became human protectorates under emergency administration." "Impossible. You lack the administrative infrastructure to govern 300 species across 2,000 worlds." One of the other humans, a young woman with silver hair and eyes like galaxies, spoke for the first time. "Commander, you're thinking in terms of traditional governance. We don't govern. We optimize." Wells gestured, and the table's surface became a 3-dimensional map of the former hegemony space. Dr. Miranda Reeves, our director of xenocultural integration. She spent the last 6 hours implementing what we call the symbiosis protocol. The map showed the hegemony's former territories, but they had been transformed. Trade routes that had taken weeks now completed cycles in hours. Worlds that had been strip-mined for resources showed signs of ecological restoration. Most remarkably, the enslaved populations had not simply been freed, but integrated into a new economic structure that seemed to benefit everyone involved. Ow! Vortak Jimandet. You had no advanced planning, no infrastructure in place. This is the work of decades, not hours. Dr. Reeves smiled, and the expression held depths that made Vorth AK dizzy. We've been planning this for years, Commander. Every hegemony communication we intercepted, every tactical analysis we conducted, every cultural study we performed. We've been building a complete model of your civilization in our quantum simulation matrices. When the time came to implement changes, we simply activated protocols that had been tested millions of times in virtual environments. Captain Chen leaned forward slightly. You wanted to know what humanity looks like when unrestricted? This is it. We don't just defeat our enemies. We transform them into something better than they were before. It's more efficient than genocide and more permanent than conquest. The implications were staggering. The humans hadn't just defeated the hegemony. They had been prepared to replace it entirely. Every system, every trade route, every administrative function had been mapped, analyzed, and optimized before the first shot was fired. Your species will be relocated to suitable worlds within human space, Wells continued. You'll retain your culture, your traditions, your autonomy in internal affairs. But your capacity for interstellar warfare is now permanently limited. Think of it as a parole arrangement. And if we refuse these terms? The fourth human, who had remained silent throughout the meeting, finally spoke. His voice carried harmonics that seemed to resonate in dimensions Vorth AK couldn't perceive. Commander, you're still thinking in terms of choice. That option expired when you attacked our civilian populations. What's happening now isn't negotiation. It's rehabilitation. Vorth AK studied the human delegation, finally, understanding the true scope of what his species had encountered. How long have you been planning for something like this? Since we first detected radio signals from other civilizations, Wells replied. About 400 years ago. You see, we learned early that the galaxy was full of predatory species. So we developed strategies for dealing with that reality. The Terran Defense Coalition was always a facade, a civilized front to interact with other species while we prepared for the inevitable. Dr. Reeves manipulated the table display, showing human space as it truly existed. Massive installations that dwarfed entire star systems. Industrial complexes that operated on scales that redefined the concept of mega-engineering. Most disturbing of all, vast breeding programs that had apparently been developing new categories of humans optimized for specific tasks. We've been preparing for galactic war since before your species achieved spaceflight, she explained. Every human you've encountered in the past 2 years was part of our diplomatic corps, specifically trained to appear harmless and primitive. The individuals you fought at Kepler 442 were from our Special Problems Division, designed to handle situations that required creative solutions. And the 12 million unrestricted operators Captain Chen mentioned? The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Wells' pleasant expression never changed, but something in the air made Vorth AK's survival instincts flood his system with stress hormones. Those individuals represent what our species becomes when we stop caring about collateral damage. They're held in stasis on installations throughout human space, activated only when facing extinction-level threats. You came very close to meeting them. The ceremony concluded with Vorth AK affixing his genetic signature to surrender documents that had apparently been prepared months before the war even began. As he prepared to leave, Wells offered one final observation. Supreme Commander, your species made a fundamental error. You assumed that because we valued peace, we were weak. You mistook civilization for inability. In truth, Human civilization exists specifically to contain what we actually are. When you forced us to drop that pretense, you discovered that we are very, very good at war. We've had millions of years to perfect it. As Vorthe Case transport departed the impossible station, he reflected on the lessons learned at such terrible cost. Humanity had not been conquered or defeated. They had been provoked into revealing their true nature. And that nature was something that would reshape the galaxy forever. The war was over. Humanity had won so completely that the concept of victory itself had been redefined. And somewhere in the depths of space, 12 million sleeping monsters remained in stasis, waiting for the next species foolish enough to mistake human mercy for human weakness.